Welcome, everybody. My name is Gina Clonan, and I am the founding president of the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. For nearly 3 decades, the Hall has worked to discover and share the stories of women. Our various educational platforms acknowledge the individual and the collective feminine voice. There is no more important time than now to talk and to listen. It's Women's History Month, so please support the Hall in any way you can. Your help fulfills our mission by keeping women's stories in the forefront. A special thanks to the William and Alice Mortensen Foundation and the Avangrid Foundation for their continued support. This will be a half-hour, intimate and informative chat, followed by 15 minutes of your questions, which we encourage you to submit at any time during the webinar by simply clicking the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Our goal is simple: a virtual gathering to talk about today's important issues. We hope this will be a useful source of information while offering up some helpful takeaways. I am honored today to have with us a nationally recognized leader whose works across diverse platforms bring awareness to complex issues that impact our ability to create and maintain change that elevates humanity. Her approach is thoroughly holistic, relying on extensive research and personal experience. For over 40 years, by virtue of her formidable feminine voice, she has constructed pathways for learning, growing, and achieving a communion of mind, body, and spirit for millions of us. In particular, she's focused on the importance of women's history in shaping women's leadership and success. Please welcome Elizabeth Lesser.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving up your lunch hour to talk with us.
Yes, thank you for joining. And I know more of you are joining as we speak, but we'll start to move along. Elizabeth, though you've authored 4 books and countless essays, papers, speeches, and presentations, for our limited time together, let's focus on your latest book, Cassandra Speaks, with its byline, "When Women Are the Storytellers, the Human Story Changes." Illuminate for us why HerStory is so important and why you chose Cassandra as your headliner.
Well, her story, as opposed to only his story, history. I know that that isn't what history really, language-wise, that's not where history comes from. But it is kind of funny, isn't it? That it's his story. Her story has been left out of the story. This isn't some sort of wild claim. This is the truth. In fact, one of my favorite historians, Sally Roche Wagner. You probably don't know her name, which is the whole point here. Everyone should know her name, but she's called a feminist historian because she writes about history through the lens of the left out stories. And so that's called feminist history. And she says, history isn't what happened, it's who tells the story. And that is the truth from the beginning of time, whether you go all the way back to the Bible or the Greeks or our favorite literature or our history books, it has been told through the male lens. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong inherently with the male lens, but it is a lens. And if you check out some of the stories, which I did a lot when writing this book, unless you think they dropped from the sky, the Bible stories just like fell from the sky, or the Greek myths, they were made up by people. They were told by people, and those people were men. And they say a lot about men. Stories written by men are about men, and everybody else, they're the protagonist, and everybody else are just useful seconds who came into the story. So why is it important? Because it tells the other half of the sky. And why did I choose Cassandra as the title of the book? I was researching a lot of stories, Eve and Pandora and Hester Prynne and all sorts of literature and movies. As I was reading the story of Cassandra, something was happening in the culture. It was really the blossoming of the Me Too movement. And that trial of Larry Nassar, the doctor who had abused hundreds and hundreds of mostly gymnasts, but lots of young athletes, girls, women. That trial was happening because finally girls had spoken up. And I saw those girls very much in the story of Cassandra. Cassandra was a Greek princess who didn't want to marry anyone. She wanted to serve the gods. And all the men were after her because she was the most beautiful princess in the land. And even the gods were after her. And Apollo, the son of Zeus, wooed her by saying, I will give you this gift, Cassandra. You will see into the future. You'll know everything. You'll know the truth and you'll tell the truth and you'll be our prophetess. She wanted that. Who wouldn't want that? He didn't warn her that it came with the caveat that then he would bed her and wed her. She didn't understand this. So she took the gift. He tried to sleep with her. She refused and he cursed her. He said, you will know the truth. You will know your experience. You will say it, but no one will believe you. And that is a story that has haunted women from the beginning of time. We know things, we experience things, we say them, and often we're called hysterical, too emotional, not clear enough. Maybe you're having your period, all the things that women hear when we say, this is what's true, this is what's happening, this is what's important. So I saw those girls in the Larry Nassar trial as Cassandras, telling the truth, not being believed by their mothers and fathers and their coaches and their universities, but finally finding their voices and telling their truth.
Well, thank you. And actually, my second question was about voices. So how did you find yours and how did you make it heard?
Well, I would be lying to say like, one day I found my voice, you know. It's been such a long process. And in some ways it's still going on. I'm in my 60s. You would think, you know, I've written, I've run an educational institute. I've done a lot in my life. You'd think I know my voice and I use it all the time and I'm really clear. No, those old stories stick to us women still. So I'm a work in progress, but I would have to say that it came through the most difficult times in my life, finding my voice, my divorce, you know, in becoming a single mom and standing for what I needed. That was a trial by fire. I've written in one of my books that I call that the Phoenix process, where you know you're going to lose some stuff if you say what's true for you, whether it's a relationship or a family member or a job or friends or your position at work. If you say the truth, you know you're so afraid to do it, but you do it anyway. Those have been the times in my life that I've found traction as I've climbed up, looking for my true voice, my authentic voice. Also, sticking up for other women. When I couldn't do it for myself, that kind of gave me my muscle, gave me some muscle. It was easier for me to ask for something for another woman than it was for myself. And I began to see, hey, if I could ask for her or advocate for her pay raise or her not being treated that way in a meeting, I could do it for myself too.
Yeah, there's opportunity and adversity. You made mention earlier, and for those who didn't hear it, history comes from the Latin and Greek word historia, which means narrative or study of the past, and it's completely unrelated to the male pronoun his. Her story is bound to a social movement to recognize the overlooked, undermined, and negated historical contributions of women. You posit that it's more than just acknowledgement. It's actually rewriting the false and destructive narratives, beginning with the prevailing origin story. Explain its overwhelming significance.
Yes, our origin story, Adam and Eve, the Western Judeo-Christian and Islamic, because The Old Testament is also read in Islam. So it's an enormous amount of humanity that is branded by our origin story. And pretty much everyone knows the story of Adam and Eve, and even if you didn't grow up in a religious family. And it's, in my mind, Eve was the first real protagonist in the Bible. Well, that God was the first real protagonist. And God, you know, put the first man, Adam, in a perfect garden, a garden where he wanted for nothing. There was food, there were animals, it was beautiful, it was perfect, it was paradise. And then he noticed after, I don't know, hundreds of years, I don't know how long the time goes in the Bible, he noticed that Adam needed a helpmate. I think maybe he got tired of taking care of Adam. And so he made Eve. And Eve was a curious, alive human. She, if you look at some of the old pictures of her, she has this awakeness in her eyes. And in the Bible, all the protagonists, whether it's Noah or Job or Jesus, Moses, these are all men in the Bible who felt the need to grow and change their cultures. And they listened within to this urge, this curiosity to be wise and to lead. These are the leaders that we worship in the Bible, because they listened to themselves. They left what was known. They went on the hero's journey, looking for themselves and their inner wisdom. They found it. They had to go through trials and tests. Eve is the only protagonist who is punished for being curious about that tree in the center of the garden. The snake says, it'll make you wise. And she says, but God said we shouldn't eat it. And the snake said, no, God said you would become like gods if you ate the fruit. And she wanted to. She wanted wisdom, just like all the dudes in the Bible wanted wisdom. She ate it. And I think of Eve as the first grown-up, humanity's first grown-up. She had to leave the garden. She had to learn how to take care of herself. And they had to become grown-up people, mature people, which is the hero's journey. Eve is a hero, but instead she has been branded as second born, first to sin. I am interested in removing that first to sin and calling Eve our first hero.
Well, while we're on the subject, let's talk about hero myths and heroine realities. Your observations in Cassandra Speaks caused me to rethink my daily diet of history-making events, nudes, arts, and entertainment. In particular, I was fascinated by the reality of the hero myths. Beyond Eve, tell us how they've influenced not just the way society looks at women and men, but the way we look at ourselves.
Yeah. Well, men, you know, a story I didn't go into a lot in the book, which I love, which I've studied a lot since writing it. It's a science story. It's not just myths and religious tales that affect us. Science is sort of our religion now. And there are some science stories that we just buy, and then later they get outdated, but we still think it's true. One of them is this idea that under stress, all human beings either fight or flee, the fight or flight instinct. And those studies were done by a man named Walter Cannon at Harvard in the early 1940s and duplicated over the years. And he brought us people into the lab and studied their reaction to stress. How did it change their hormones? How did it change other chemicals under simulated stress? And he saw and called that under stress, humans fight, they get aggressive, or they withdraw. They either run away or they withdraw through like drinking too much or things like that. Well, in the year 2000, a woman named Shelley Taylor at UCLA noticed that those studies had only been done on men. The only people brought into the lab were men. because that's all studies were done, medical studies and psychological studies, until quite recently. They were only done on men. She duplicated those studies, bringing women and doing studies or aggregating studies done on animals, female animals as well. And she discovered that under stress, many women, really most, that's not what happens. They do not secrete hormones that are about aggression or withdrawal. And she termed that what women do under stress is tend and befriend. That the response to stress, the response to everything from just your daily stress to all sorts of horrible traumas in the world, is not to fight or to withdraw. Women will either tend to the most vulnerable in the clan or the animal group under stress, gather people together, help the children, the older people, or befriend. You know, you come home from work, you've had a terribly hard day, and your first instinct is, I'm going to call my friends and talk about this and get some support and help. Whereas a male response usually is to withdraw. So when I look at the hero myth, it's all been about fight or flight. What do heroes do? They're first responders. They fight. You know, and all of our language is about the fighting spirit of the heroes. I am less interested in women replicating heroism, that it always has to be about fighting, and making it more about giving muscle and clout to tending and befriending. I would like the new hero to be, and it doesn't have to be women, but what the world doesn't need anymore of the fighting and fleeing. What the world needs is tending and befriending. And I would like that to become the definition of the hero.
I love that. And one thing that you pointed out in the book that really just knocked me for a loop was Wonder Woman, the movie 2020, was hailed for its recognition of the female superhero. But wait, it didn't much change the story, did it?
No, I mean, I went into it so excited. I was so excited that we were going to get Wonder Woman, the female hero. And sure, I don't want to be a party pooper because I know a lot of people just love just seeing a woman in that, superhero role. But I was disappointed, and I was super disappointed with the second one, which apparently other people were because nobody seems to be watching it. It came out a couple of months ago. I thought to myself, okay, Wonder Woman has all these powers. She could speak multiple languages. She could know what was going to happen in the future. She could change the past. She could pretty much do anything she wanted. And all she did was wear a bustier and look really hot, which was great. I like to look hot. But she marched into a battlefield and just did hand-to-hand combat with other warriors. And I thought, that is not women's superpower. And I don't want to have to prove my masculinity to be a superhero. What if she had come in and said, okay, everybody, no more fighting. We're going to sit down at a really beautiful table. I'm going to set it gorgeously. I'm going to cook delicious food. Everyone has to sit down and start talking. Oh, you don't know how to talk amongst yourself? You're uncomfortable sharing your feelings? I'm going to teach you. And we're going to talk it out so we don't have to kill each other. And then we're going to figure out, how do we share resources equitably? How do we make this a beautiful experience for all of humanity? Forget this fighting business. That is what I think women's superpower is and can be, and we can train ourselves and men so that this idea of what it means to be a hero changes.
I couldn't agree with you more. And Hollywood's exploding right now with female leadership in front of and behind the camera. I was totally taken with Barbara Hall's character, Madam Secretary, that then became Madam President. She, for me, was the epitome of what you call for women to power differently. So it's one thing to rewrite the story on the screen or on the page, but how about in everyday life?
Harder. Much
Much harder.
but thrilling.
Yeah.
In very little ways. You know, it's not like all of a sudden the heavens open and fabulous music pours through the speakers when you do it at work or at home. It's the little things. And but you know what? It's heroic in its own way. If you're in a meeting and people are kind of talking over each other, doing that sort of locker room put down, or no, the people who should be talking are too scared to talk, or the leader is being power over as opposed to, hey, what's all of us thinking here? Interrupting that way of behaving at work, it's risky, and you don't have to do it full of rage and anger, although I have been known to be like that at times, and you don't have to do it all at once, but slow eroding into the everyday abuses of power, and finding women to back you up and to be your allies, and men too, to do power differently, more inclusive, less this idea of not sharing how you feel, this idea that you could get angry in a meeting but you couldn't cry, that was some sort of sign of weakness, to share our female hearts, and again, to be Cassandras, to know what we know, to know it, to value it, to speak up for the vulnerable amongst us at home and at work.
And that brings us to some of the things that may stand in our way to be able to do that. Many of us may not know it by name, but certainly have experienced it. So let's talk about the imposter syndrome and how your own experience with it in the founding of Omega, its women's conferences and its women's leadership center. I was fascinated by this idea of the imposter syndrome, which I told you I had when I wrote to you to ask you to be on the webinar today.
Yeah. The imposter syndrome, I imagine many of you have heard of it, and I imagine all of you have it, because most of us do. And not only women, but mostly women, and women of color, and women of different sexualities. The more you feel marginalized, the more you have this voice in your head. I don't belong here. I'm not smart enough. I don't know enough. There's all these business studies that have been done that men speak up knowing even less than the women know. Men have a much lower bar of what makes them an expert or what makes them feel they could ask for a raise. And women are like, well, I'll wait. There's those people. I didn't really do enough. I haven't been here long enough to ask for more money. It's not only about money. It's just about believing in our voice, believing that we have something to say. And this is not something I am fully cured of. Why would we be cured of it really fast? It comes back all the way to Eve, where we have some sort of shame about who we are, that there's something that does not quite measure up. We are not enough. And I think that is something worth working on within ourselves. How do you do it? I mean, for some, it's as simple as therapy and going in and working with someone who helps you separate out the voices in your head. Who is telling you that? Whose voice is that? Mother, father, culture, school, religion. That's all therapy was for me, kind of trying to figure out, do I have a voice that is free from the negative talk? Trying to find it and believe in it. That's one way to do it. And the other is to, like when you mentioned to me that you were feeling that imposter syndrome, and I get back to you and say, oh my God, I feel it too. I shouldn't be on the Connecticut Women Hall of Fame. I'm not that famous. I'm not from Connecticut. You know, I had all the same things going. Michelle Obama, Maya Angelou, all these people, I quote them in my book, they all have imposter syndrome. Michelle Obama said it took her being in meetings with some of the leaders of the world to realize they're not that smart. I'm smarter than some of them. None of us are going to get to be with all the leaders of the world, but we can use that part of that rational part of ourselves to realize we do have what it takes. We do have enough.
You know, and one of the best things I love about your work and about this book is that you not only illuminate what we're up against, our history or our present day status, but you give us ways to look inside, to help ourselves. You're just speaking to the imposter syndrome. So you talk to us to venture inside as well as outside of ourselves. And you say that it's a journey on and off the page for the reader. And that brings us to these themes, which I had never heard before: innervism and activism. You just talked about it, but perhaps people don't know that's exactly what you're talking about. But talk about those two themes that run throughout Cassandra Speaks.
Well, I made up the word innervism. That might be why you never heard it.
I like it.
You know, I've always been an activist from my youngest years. I've always been a feminist. Grew up in a female-centric household, but with a very domineering father. 4 girls, my mother, my grandmother, my great aunt, and my father. He, a very typical father of those days, you know, it was his way or the highway. And for some reason, I was the girl in the family who was like, wait a minute here, this isn't fair. And I have carried that sort of yearning for justice in the world, my activist self. But I've also noticed, because we've done a whole lot at Omega Institute of bringing nonprofits and social justice groups for free to our campus and allowing them to have their meetings on campus and bringing meditation and yoga and healing into their groups for them. I noticed early on, back in my 30s, I noticed, wow, some of these peace activists, they're really angry people. Or some of these social justice people, their entire organization isn't very kind or just. So how do you match up what you want in the outside world and how you live in here? And women, like, we may say we want to do power differently, but we have our own shadows. We are not always kind. We are not always just. We are not always fair. And to the extent that we can match up through inner work, meditation, therapy, healing work with what we long to see in the world, you know, the very overused yet true phrase from Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. That to me is innervism, working on yourself so that your dreams for the world match your behavior. As you don't have to become a saint, but just the idea that you're working on yourself.
You know, I'm sure I have, and I'm sure others have often blamed themselves for unfeminist behavior. I've often not recognized my own internalized patriarchy or the external ramifications of it. Let's talk your own realization. And I quote, "Holy shit, I am the patriarchy."
Well, holy shit, I am the patriarchy is actually Brene Brown's, you know, the author Brene Brown.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah, she was speaking at Omega one year, and she was talking about this idea that women, and not only women, people who care about the world often say, this is what we want. And then they go home and act the opposite. She had been talking to business leaders all day about being kind, being clear in communication, and releasing the more feminine aspect of yourself. And then she went home and was a total awful person to her husband and kids. And that's where she thought, holy shit, I'm the patriarchy. And in some ways that's dangerous work for women to do, because we're so used to taking excess responsibility for everything and thinking we have to do the emotional work of the whole world. And I'm a big fan of women strengthening our backbone and not always taking responsibility for everything. But I also think there's huge room for us to look within at our shadowy stuff and work on it and soften it and transform ourselves. It's possible.
It is. And, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the pandemic and how it has spotlighted many realities, especially for women and hardest hit minority women. So often we measure female empowerment by the workplace gains. As for our homework, we've used language like domestic diva or goddess to disguise the reality of what scholar and theorist Sylvia Federici calls unpaid reproductive labor, which is unjust and unsustainable. Your thoughts?
First of all, that article about her in the New York Times Magazine 2 or 3 weeks ago, a must read for everyone. Yes. Because women and the economy and the home economy, Gloria Steinem says women won't be free outside the home until men are engaged inside the home. And this is what she was talking about in that article and in her books, this idea that, or the Arlie Hochschild, have you ever read her books, The Second Shift and things like that? The fact that women have spent the last 100+ years learning how to function in the work world. We had to, we wanted to, we needed to. We have built those muscles. We have changed the elasticity of our brain cells to learn how to be very different from what our mothers and grandmothers were. Men can do the same thing. They must want to change as much as we wanted to change. They must want to be amazing fathers, not just babysitters. They must see the dirt in the house and want to clean it. They must not look at a refrigerator and think, one day that will magically be filled. They must be, oh, we need milk, and go and get it. That is, fortunately the brain is plastic. They have learned that over the years, the brain scientists, that our brains never stop changing and that we can change the neural pathways. Men must change those neural pathways. They'll be happier for it. I mean, I'm so happy I'm a woman. I'm so happy my instinct is to tend and befriend. And I want all women to be so proud of that aspect of ourselves that men are like, I want that too.
Exactly.
I want to be like that.
And as a mother of 2 sons, I am so hopeful because I see in my sons and a lot of their peers a resolve to do just that.
Me too.
They are very different fathers. They are very different husbands. And we just hope that spreads.
Absolutely. I have 3 sons and they are all amazing fathers and house husbands. And I also have to always remind myself, we live in bubbles of privilege and luxury. And there are women around the world who are experiencing medieval behavior between men and women. Down the street, women experiencing so much domestic violence because of what's been going on with the pandemic. So, gosh, I'm so happy about the changes in so many of our young men and women. And we must be vigilant because as we've seen in the pandemic, when things get tough, women lose their rights right away.
Yeah.
So it's both a celebration of our times and a vigilance to get some traction here.
You're absolutely right. You said in Cassandra Speaks, and I quote, "Women carry within us a way of being, thinking, feeling, and leading, long denied its power and validity. You have a dream for humanity through the feminine lens that is not about one gender over another, but the mixing and blending of it all." That's right. And you spoke to that a little bit within the home, but we could see that all over the world in many different ways.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. It's a time when people are exploring this spectrum of gender, that there isn't just one way to be a man or one way to be a woman. It's not all women are nice and kind and all men are you know, aggressive and bad. It's celebrating so many aspects of what it means to be a human. You can be this kind of woman and that kind of woman. It's not about your sex. It's about valuing the whole rainbow range of what it means to be a human.
Absolutely. I want to remind everybody to get in your questions. I'm going to ask one more question of our guest today, and then we're going to take questions from you. So please just click on the Q&A bubble at the bottom of the screen and ask away. So in ending, Elizabeth, through your writing, your journey of discovery becomes ours. Did you feel the same excitement, wonderment, and introspection that I did, and probably most people who read the book did? What was your journey like as the writer?
Oh, my journey was well, writing has never been like easy, right? Anybody who writes a book knows that it is a journey, as they say. But it was a blend of quieting the imposter syndrome constantly, which is definitely the writer's curse, the imposter syndrome, and amazing excitement about liberating these stories from the past and feeling them in my own body and in my own life and handing them to the reader as saying, see, you're not alone here. And there's reasons for why you feel and act the way you do. Like your sisters through the ages are with you, and we get to carry on the story in new and improved ways.
You know, this just popped up on my screen. One of our guests says the book seems out of stock on Amazon. Is that true?
I don't know. I'll have to check today.
It's just sold out.
Well, it did sell out a few weeks ago, and they reprinted it, and I thought they had stocked it. I'll check into it. Yeah. And you know what? This is a great time for me to plug independent bookstores, because I know that a lot of independents have it, and I've actually signed some. There's an independent bookstore in Rhinebeck, New York called Oblong, and they have a great, they'll send it out to you right away. So don't only think it's about Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. And we have, I think it's called Raoul Jula, Roxanne Cody's fabulous little bookstore up the shoreline here in Connecticut, which is probably one of the last independent bookstores in the entire state. So I'm sure she carries it as well, being that she is all things feminine. Here's from an anonymous attendee. Can you discuss the current Andrew Cuomo story in a dispassionate way? He did not touch any of these women in ways that women of earlier times had to fear, but neither did he respect them. The women are being believed, unlike dear Cassandra, but he's not being punished in any way.
Wow, this is so huge. We could have spent the entire time talking about this, and I can't say that I have a pat answer for you. I'm with you we are in changing times. Things are changing. And so, you know, there's the terror of the cancel culture, that if you do anything wrong, you're canceled. There's that whole story. There's on the far other end of the spectrum, there's like anybody who does anything that is offensive to women needs to be out. I tend to swing a little more into the center, that I am so happy these women are coming out. I am so happy it's being told. I also feel we need to be a nation of laws and a nation of trials, and you are innocent until proven guilty. So I am not sure that he should step down, but I am sure that he should be held to account, and that this story should not just be swept under the rug because, well, Trump didn't get punished for it. No, we need to go forward, but we need to go forward slowly, deliberately, and lawfully.
You know, and in some ways, I can't help but think that everything that women are continually fight for it can be framed in the way that we mother. So if a child has bad behavior, we don't always castigate that child to the corner or you're grounded for 3 weeks. We try to talk through the situation and make it a learning experience. And I think with behaviors in the workplace, because I know that people always get confused when I say something about a person that is their behavior is being revealed. I feel like I always have to remind the men in my life, this is about the workplace. Please don't get confused with flirting and this and that. If I'm in a bar and you say something to me and I say something to you, we're there looking for one another. But if you're my boss and everything I do in my job puts food on the table, my life depends upon it, and I am uncomfortable by your behavior, that's a whole different story. So there's so many lessons to be learned in this. And just as you say, just throwing everyone out or punishing everyone really doesn't move the dial forward. Maybe it scares people. So now you're living in fear, which you don't want people to go to work every day also living in fear of one another.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm always for redemption and for the teachable moment. Now, there are some people who do not want to be redeemed and do not want to be taught. If Andrew Cuomo can't learn from this and demonstrate for real, genuinely, authentically, that he gets what's going on here, and these aren't just a bunch of complaining women, and these are women whose lives and jobs were jeopardized by his aggressive, blind, crude behavior. If he doesn't get that and uses it as a teachable moment for everyone and helps men learn through it and does his mea culpa and makes some changes in laws, like really uses it, if he can't do that, well, then he deserves to have his career ended. But let's see if he can. I'm not particularly hopeful, because even before he became such a hero during COVID, he was not regarded as the most kindly of bosses, whether it was by women or men. But let's give him a chance and let all the women keep coming forward, and let's learn, see where we go with this.
Well, I think I don't see any more questions, and we're coming upon the last minute in our talk. There's a story that's been all over the globe this week, and I'd like to end with a quote from the Meghan Markle interview with Oprah Winfrey, because a lot of us have watched it, and if we haven't, we've heard about it. I thought this was particularly meaningful. Meghan said, and I quote, "Life is about storytelling, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that we are told, and what of those stories we buy into." She hopes that storytelling can happen through a truth lens that hopefully is uplifting and gives voice to the unrepresented, the underrepresented, and the unheard. I thought that spoke so effectively to our talk here today. And that here is another brave woman standing up and telling a story which is for a lot of people very difficult to buy into, to hear, and for other people a brilliant affirmation of what they already knew.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I thought the three of them were brilliant. I thought Oprah was, as Tina Brown said, if you want to know who the real queen is, it was Oprah. And I thought Harry was exactly how you describe your boys. Yeah. I thought he made me cry several times. I thought, what a prince, what a real prince. And yeah. She was the new princess. Yeah. She took it from Diana, who had sacrificed her. I mean, I see this as an archetypal story. I see this as a myth. I mean, because who cares about the king and queen and the prince and princess? I mean, it's so on some level meaningless, but on an archetype level of these big stories, this is the story of the changing nature of men, women, race, power, prestige. I just was riveted and moved by the whole thing.
And one last word from someone said, don't forget the wonderful Hickory Stick Bookshop in Washington Depot, which is right here in our state of Connecticut. And also Elizabeth mentioned one close by to her. I can't thank you enough for today. And I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you do and your writing and how it's just a wonderful diet for us all to embark on. We want to keep following you. We hope to come out to Omega to see you. We know that your clothes, like all of us, are still remote, virtual, but hopeful that we can all be together soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My only sadness is I didn't get to see everybody and meet everybody, but I send you my real love and sisterhood to everyone.
Thank you. And thank you all for attending. And we hope to see you in April when we talk about, on 2 separate occasions, about the She Session. We're going to evaluate all the data, and we're also going to evaluate all the proposed measures that are in place in Connecticut and around the country to address women and our experiences in the pandemic. So thank you once again, Elizabeth, to all of you. Have a great day.